Hi, my name's David Hanning. I'm the owner of DentalTI and a founder of FTG Imaging. I'm looking forward to Shahin's Corner and talking to him about the latest and greatest in dental. We're going to be showcasing the FTG DC Air. The latest generation of intraoral imaging is both direct version and wireless, and it's better than anything out there, and that's what we're going to be talking about on Shahin's Corner. Looking forward to it.
All right, that was awesome. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Shahin's Corner podcast. I have a special guest today, David Hanning, founder and CEO of DentalTI and FTG. I want him to tell me how far behind I am in technology today compared to where everybody else is. And so I'm excited to have him. David, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well. Thank you very much, Dr. Safarian. It's great to be on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Look, there's so much talk about technology, from scanners to printers to intraoral camera to CBCTs and the different types. I mean, to be honest, it can be a whole residency in itself of technology. And right now, 3D printers are a really big deal. Mm-hmm. And a lot of dental practices are jumping on board. But I wanted to first learn a little bit more about you, David. So if you don't mind sharing a little background of how you got to where you are today, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated from Ball State University with a degree in economics in 1990. And I got out of college and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So did different jobs. I was a manager at a paint store and moonlighting, actually, painting. When I was painting my sister's boyfriend's kitchen one night, late at night, and he had an intraoral camera sitting on his kitchen table. And this was back in the early 90s. And I asked him, I said, "Tony, what's that?" And he said, "Well, it's an intraoral camera." I said, "What's it doing?" He said, "Well, sit down and check it out." So I played around with it, looked at my teeth. I was fascinated. I'd never seen my teeth like that before. And Tony, who later, by the way, became my brother-in-law, said, "Well, I know you don't like your job at the paint store, and I can see you're a hard worker. What do you think about getting into maybe trying your hand at sales with the intraoral camera?" I said, "Well, that technology looks really neat. And you're right, I'm not enjoying life at the paint store, so let me give that a shot." So he had a seminar up in Michigan, and he gave me 20 leads, and I drove up to Michigan and spent a week up there, went around and demoed at least half of those leads, and I think I sold 5 or 6 intraoral cameras, and I felt like I could do that. I was hooked. Tony was happy, of course, as well, and that's sort of how I got into it. And from there, I did very well in sales, which when you do well in sales, they typically stick you in sales management, so then they made me a sales manager. Insight Imaging, who I was working with, got purchased by New Image. And from there, I was a regional manager with New Image. I got hired at ADT to be a national sales manager. They did air abrasion and lasers. I worked with Schick Technologies after that. I worked with Computer Age Dentist in the late 90s. And by the time Computer Age was purchased, I thought, I've got enough relationships in the industry. I really want to sort of shoot out and try to do this on my own. And so in 1999, I became a reseller for Digital Doc and did that independently. And then in 2003, I started DentalTI, decided to hire some technicians and really started approaching more digital X-ray, cone beam, 2D, et cetera. And it sort of grew from there. I do have a family. In fact, I met my wife, Donna, who's amazing. She's worked with me my entire career. One of my first demos back in 1992 at a dental office. She was a dental assistant there. So, and then I have 3 children, 19, 22, and 16. 16-year-old daughter, and my 2 oldest are my sons. And my oldest son actually works with us at DentalTI, so that's exciting. But basically, from there and growing DentalTI in 2016. I met a physicist by the name of Konstantinos Spartiotis, and he's one of the world's foremost experts on direct conversion technology and imaging. And he told me, he said, Dave, I know you guys have sold a lot of sensors. You've done consulting for different sensor companies, and I'd like to have you consult with me about bringing a direct conversion wired sensor to the US because it will have the best image quality of any sensor out there. And I said, well, Konstantinos, that's great that it's going to have the best image quality, but it's really not enough to set it apart. I said, the biggest downside of any sensor today is the water. And most of them terminate in USB. And USB is only rated at 1,500 connects and disconnects. So there's all sorts of problems with wired sensors. And I said, if we can take the wire off, make it much more comfortable, not have that connection and give it the best image quality, then I think we'll have a home run. That project, so FTG, I was one of the founders of that company. And 2017, we started that project. And it took us 5 years, over $6 million of investment, over 40 engineers working on it. And in July last year, we got our FDA for that product. So that's sort of, and then today with DentalTI, where we sell scanners, we sell printers, we're looking at more of that 3D workflow, CBCT, of course, everything related to what you call the digital workflow. And our philosophy has always been simplifying technology. My personal experiences in training many offices, developing workflows, creating shortcuts in software so you've got 1 click instead of 3, for example, is that everyone today really wants 1, 2, 3. We really don't have time for 1 through 10. People want simplicity. So our whole philosophy at DentalTI is to make technology very usable in a simple fashion. But I know that was a lot of words, but that's sort of how I got to where I am today.
That's great, and that investment obviously is no joke. I can understand and appreciate the process of accomplishing something that hopefully will change the profession. We talked a little bit before, and I said, don't judge me with the technology that's behind me, but I don't think I can tell you for a fact that I'm not up to 2022 standards. And I don't know how you can keep up. It seems like every 6 months something changes. And there's an upgrade in a system or a software. But it also doesn't mean that you just sit on the sidelines and watch technology pass you by, because what ends up happening is your practice can become obsolete, and it can be a niche differentiator between the dentist down the street. What are some basic, David, if I was to, doctors right now are not paperless, for example. And you talked about direct conversion. I'm interested in getting more into that. There's still a lot of wires in a dental practice, right?
Convention.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but still a lot of wires. But if there's some, nuggets that you can share with the audience as far as what are 3 or 4 areas that are crucial for a dental practice to be up on technology and the importance of that? How would you answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would tell you it all starts with your computer network. So the computers in your office drive everything. No one can take an x-ray with a digital sensor unless it's plugged into a computer. And I think in dental, I see offices really trying to stretch their computer technology as far as they can, and not recognizing that in terms of the investment, the computer technology is sort of like an engine in a car. If your computers are old, if they were upgraded, maybe I see this many times, doctors upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10, and then they may have problems with their digital x-ray that runs on the USB bus. Well, what you have to remember is a Windows 10 computer was developed with Windows 10 in mind. So the architecture was developed to optimize Windows 10, whereas a Windows 7 computer was developed with that architecture in mind. So upgrading is not a good idea. So I think that what I would say is really spend some time looking at your computer network and make sure that that's up to snuff to run all of your technology, because the computer aspect is really very inexpensive related to the technology that you're plugging into it. I'll give you an example. The computer that I have here on this screen behind me is about 4 inches by 4 inches. It's a little Nook computer that's on the back of this screen. And it's an i5 11th gen. It's got 16 gigs of RAM, plenty fast, solid state hard drive, does everything you could possibly want to do. And that computer was $600. And there are offices out there that are spending, $7, $8, $10,000 on sensors, and they're trying to plug them into computers that are 10 years old that they've upgraded twice. And I would say that's always a bad strategy, is to try to take really critical pieces that are relatively inexpensive and stretch the life. So that would be the first thing I would say, is understand your IT environment and the usable, and I say usable, you can use computers for 10 years, but as they start dying, you have all sorts of intermittent problems. And what is the cost to you if every other time you go in and take an x-ray, you can't, right? Or you have to plug it, unplug it 4 or 5 times to finally get it to work. It obviously costs you time, but it also embarrasses you in front of your patient as well. So that would be, I think, one of the top things I would look at, is understand your computer network. You have all the computers tied together. So you have the performance of each individual computer, and then you have your server where all of your data is stored, right? That's where all your data is stored. So that server is very important. So understanding backup of data is also a critical aspect to your business. I've seen too many offices lose data, and they should have never lost data. I've seen instances where IT people were taking care of the networks, and they didn't realize they had to, for example, close down the practice work server before it was backed up. And then they had a failure and they couldn't get their data back because they never had a really good backup. So I would say really know that you have a good backup. Backup always has to do with redundancy. So you should not only have hard drives on site. Today, web storage is so cheap, you should also have all of your data on a web server as well. And then also, and by the way, if you have great backups, you don't have to worry about malware like CryptoLocker. I've seen way too many offices get hit with ransomware. They discover they don't have a good backup, or perhaps their backup was connected when they got the ransomware, and now their backup drive is locked as well. And they end up, I know of one office that in total spent $100,000 in ransom to get their data back. So it's terrible, but it can be prevented. And that's the first thing I would say, is really get knowledgeable. And I'm not talking about knowledgeable where you can add a PC to your network. Okay. I'm talking about knowledgeable on how's my data backed up? How do I know that that data has integrity? Well, how you know it has integrity is you do a test restore, and you don't do a test restore. Whoever's charging you, your IT, to do the backup, that needs to be part of the plan is, hey guys, I want to see a test restore once a month, right? To know, I want to get alerts to my cell phone if the backup fails. All these things can be automated. I think too often we put critical responsibility for our business in others' hands, and we hope that they care for it as much as we do. And we only understand that they don't when we have a really bad situation, right? And then they're nowhere to be found. So that would be one thing I would say is understand your network, understand your software, have good staff computer usage policies. Okay, going to TikTok and all that stuff, do that on your phone. Don't have staff members surfing the web, clicking on funny things that the friend sent them online. That's really the number one way to release ransomware is you get tricked into clicking on something that you should not have. So trusted sources, that's another thing. I think a good IT environment in dental involves a router that is black or a firewall that is blacklisting certain sites, and better yet, a whitelist of only the sites you want your dental people to be able to get to. And then if there's one that they need to get to, it gets added to the list. But that would be number one, the computer aspect. And then number two, and these aren't necessarily in order, but I'm giving you a few nuggets.
Sure.
A thing that I've seen in doing digital x-ray for many years is that digital x-ray is all about what they call the imaging chain. So you've, of course, got your source, your exposure, whether it's a DC or an AC x-ray head. And then you've got your receptor. That might be a phosphor plate. It may be film. It may be a digital x-ray sensor with a wire. It may be the DCR without a wire. And then you've got your computer and your computer software. And you cannot get an x-ray by removing one of those pieces. They all fit. And then what else you have your operator. And the operator is the biggest determinant of quality, assuming your system's working properly. Okay. So I always say, some fundamentals of taking x-rays, I think need to be revisited by staff members. I frequently go into offices and I see the x-ray head right out here, right? And it should be up next to the skin in every instance. There's no advantage at all to having an x-ray tube out here. Although I found offices have not been trained properly because they'll tell me, oh no, we were told that's the way that you need to do it. So that's something that I say is one, get your staff properly trained and understand your technology. Each imaging receptor requires a different amount of energy to be optimally exposed. And the biggest thing that I see with digital x-ray is because most digital x-ray sensors have a very narrow exposure latitude. That means you have to shoot it with a value that's within a couple milliseconds, right, to have a properly exposed image. And Dr. Safarian, have you noticed that in your own practice that you've apparently occasionally seen overexposed, dark, or light grainy images?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's all due to exposure, and distance has a lot to do with that. Because in the equation, distance is squared for the amount of energy hitting the sensor. So if you pull back 2 inches, you greatly reduce the amount of energy. So understanding that and staff shooting images properly, that's one great thing about the DCR. It's got such a wide exposure latitude that you can literally double the exposure and not burn out the image. So that's an amazing, but it has to do with the different technology that it uses. So ultimately, with all wired sensors to get optimal results, upper posterior PA requires the most exposure, lower anterior PA requires the least. This exposure level is typically 2 times the exposure of lower anterior because of the density, assuming distance is correct. Most offices, I see it all the time, they're using one value. So they'll have graininess back here, or they may have burnout down here because they don't want to change. And that's one thing that I've noticed over all these years. You got to make it simple, okay? An x-ray, and if you look at your x-ray head, you have all these different settings. You have presets. Staff doesn't really know when to use them, and they don't use them. And therefore, they don't get good quality. With the DCR, we can set it on one exposure level. and get good quality for every image. So that's something that, again, in understanding, what I'm coming down to here is really understanding your technology and being properly trained on it, because I feel too often staff members are saddled with all this technology. No one shows them how to use it. The doctor's frustrated at them. They're frustrated at the technology. No one's happy. And sometimes, as you know, and I'm sure you've had technology that you've just taken and put it in the cabinet, right? Or you've put it in the corner. And every time you look at it, you almost shed a tear, right? Because it was expensive. And so that's something that I always say. If you're getting a piece of technology, really do your research. Really make sure that you're committed and your staff is committed to learning the nuances of making it work. Digital X-ray is one example of that. Cone beam is another. You know, one of the foundations, Dr. Bruno Acevedo, he's an oral radiologist. He was a professor at the University of Louisville. He lectures nationwide on cone beam, probably one of the most foremost experts in the U.S. He's actually getting ready to do his endo residency as well. But he talks about the four pillars of CBCT, and one of them is acquisition. And that relies on the staff properly acquiring the image, using the proper exposure parameters. One of the things that Dr. Bruno points out is that there's far too much hype over radiation levels in dental. And if you watch his segment on digital X-ray and radiology and the levels of exposure, he said there's no dental X-ray procedure that has anywhere close to the upper limits of where you should be. So he said, always shoot for quality. Don't shoot for exposure level, shoot for quality. And so that's something as well, not getting hung up on numbers that we don't understand, that the staff doesn't understand. I remember the SUNY sensor that we sold thousands of. The SUNY's claim to fame was the lowest exposure. But the reason it had the lowest exposure is it had the lowest resolution as well. It had the largest pixels. So there's no cheating physics. You want higher resolution, you want greater detail, it's going to take more exposure, it's going to take a smaller pixel. Smaller pixels, smaller voxels to get good exposure always takes more exposure. Now, today there have been industry players that have made exposure a big deal, trying to make it a big deal. But the reality is all of the machines, you can turn them down low, you can shoot an image, you can filter it, and have the image look pleasing to the eye, but there's not as much diagnostic information there. So that's the thing as well when I'm talking about this, is really understand your equipment, understand how to optimize it. And in imaging, I think that's critical, because you've probably seen great X-rays or good X-rays, and you've seen terrible X-rays at the same time. And when you get a terrible X-ray, that's your main means of diagnosis. So if you have really bad information there, it's not going to help you. Another point that I would make is the intraoral camera. Intraoral camera, I remember when I got back, when I got into dental in 92, it was the next great thing. And dentists were actually paying, our intraoral cameras were $12,000 on a cart. They had a TV, one of those old CRT TVs, had a video printer that would pop out your Polaroid with 4 images on it, right? And it had a big old camera. And I used to get up at 5:30 in the morning and try to make 3 appointments in Michigan. And that's why I put 60,000 miles a year on my car. I'd load all that stuff up in the back of my little Honda Civic and take off and get back at 9:30 at night. So I remember all that. Good old days, right? Back when I had a pager and I'd stop at a cell phone with a handful of quarters when I first got into it. But, you know, it's much easier today, even though I hate this thing. It's much easier with this thing. So, but, you know, the intraoral camera, I think, is really overlooked. Like today, for example, you can get an intraoral camera off of eBay for $49. Now, it's not a very good one, okay? But it'll do the trick. It'll show an image, and it's a throwaway device. It will break, okay? It will break. You know, you can get one that's a little bit better, quite a bit better, for $179 or $200. You can get a very sophisticated one for $3,000, $4,000, right? Sort of the same as in the photography world. We can go get a sub 100 camera, or we can go to the camera shop and spend thousands of dollars. And we know we're going to get better results with the $5,000 camera than the $50 camera. But they're good, but they're both going to take a picture. But I think the biggest mistake that offices make is not empowering their staff with the intraoral camera and making that an every patient, every time experience. When I got into intraoral cameras, when we got around to actually capturing images into computers, I created what I called the new patient exam. And I've got it on YouTube showing me taking this in under a minute. It's face, smile, upper arch, lower arch. Then it's 5 images of the upper in the order, the numerical order, and 5 of the lower. And then it's close-ups areas of concern. And I can show the staff how to do that exam, the first 14 in under a minute. Well, when you have a staff member taking that and reviewing it with the patient, it now saves you time, because when you come in the office, you don't have to focus, or in the operatory, on the problem. You focus on the solution, and the patient is asking you about the solution. And I recognized early on, dentists like to be clinicians. They don't like to be salespeople. Okay. And I said, your time, the typical dentist time, I believe, at least the ones I deal with, is at least $1,000 an hour. Okay. And whereas the assistant time may be $20 an hour. Now, do I want to have you spending 5 minutes explaining to a patient with pictures that they have a problem, or would I prefer that that be done when you walk in the door by someone who you're paying $20 an hour? And the other thing I found is this: when the staff gets really good at using a camera and they have really clear pictures, the case for treatment is already done by the time you walk in the door. Patient is asking you about things. And one of my longtime clients told me, he said, Dave, I love this new patient exam because when I walk in, I don't have to tell them about problems. My staff's already done it. So that's something that would be another little tidbit I would say, is really get your staff motivated in using the intraoral camera and make sure it happens every time, because then that's a point of value. That's how you can teach the patient about their oral health and what to do to improve their oral health and why you're doing procedures. And so if you do a procedure, you definitely want to get the camera out and show them before and after, right? And that's something that I see offices, oh, I didn't have time for that. And my thing is always this: okay, if you did it and you're making more money for the practice and providing better care for the patient, is it worthwhile to shift and use that time for that? That's another little thing. But those would be 3 things that I would say could be beneficial for a practice to sort of focus on in terms of technology.
Well, I tell you what, there is so much in there that you shared, and there's so many things that I hope I didn't forget. I want to ask the questions, but it really starts with me with, you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
As much as you share all this information right now and talk about the fact that it's about the computer network, and if you well, I shouldn't use the word upgrade, but if you keep up with the networks as you progress with your technology, there will be less glitches in your efficiency with your system.
Yes.
I can't tell you, and I'm sure you hear this a lot more than I do. By the way, before I go into this a little further, we did have a little glitch a few minutes ago. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask the question, and we'll make sure that it gets answered. But going back to what you were saying, you can't work on 2007, 2010 computer technology and try to put in 2022 software from other companies in. You're certainly going to get glitches, right?
Mhm.
You're certainly going to have issues where there's going to be a connection problem, or an integration issue, or not able to read this and not able to read that, and it becomes pretty messy.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is the doctor doesn't know where the problem is. They think it's the software company or the printer or, the computer. I would say probably the last thing they look at is their computer network.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And they don't want to believe. And this is the other thing that I see, and no offense to IT people, because there are some excellent IT people out there in dental that know this stuff inside and out. And then there are some that really don't know dental. And I think that's the big problem is, anyone that wants to call themselves an IT person today really can, right? When they come into your office, Dr. Safarian, you don't ask them for their credentials, right?
Well, let me say this. That applies to dentistry too. Any dentist can call himself a cosmetic dentist. Any dentist can call himself an all-on-X surgeon. And they can market that, and it fits within their license. And a lot of doctors do that. The question is, are you really a cosmetic dentist or an all-on-X surgeon, or are you not? And that's the challenge. That's where the quality comes into play. So my point to you is we don't understand, just like the normal public doesn't understand the difference between quality and low quality cosmetics or surgery. We don't understand if you're a high quality IT guy or not. We
Right.
just don't.
Well, and I'll tell you, I used to own an IT company, by the way, in dental, and I didn't enjoy it. I enjoy imaging. But we were very good at our IT. And the reason we were good is this. One, we set a standard where every 5 years, you replace all your computers, period. Okay. To work with us, it's this. We would get Dell Optiplex business class machines. We knew the hardware was good. We would buy at the mid to higher end of the processor. So this is the thing you have to remember. You can buy a computer today that's based on 7-year-old technology, 8-year-old technology, because those processors are less expensive. I never want to buy on the super high end, okay, because I don't think that makes sense unless you have the need for it. But really on the mid to high can give you 5 years instead of 3. And you have to remember, if you Google what is the average use of computers in business, how many years? It's 3. It's 3. So stretching it to 5 is okay. But my thing, I don't see a lot of dentists do that. They had to do that to work with us. I told them, look, you lease this for 5 years, and then 4 years, 11 months, we replace it. Now everything's under warranty, but just know it's going to happen that way. It's not going to be, well, hey, Dave, I got 5 years. Why don't we just wait till they die one at a time? No, because if you want to do that, we'll double your service contracts. We're going to be out here a lot more frequently. So that's the thing about this is a good IT company can tell you this is the way to do it. This is the way to optimize. Okay. I can give you a complete checklist how to optimize everything, how to optimize your software, your integration, storage.
David, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off here, but I just want to kind of understand. So what is the cost for doctors to understand this cycle of investing into their computer network? You know, a lot of times doctors just fear the project, and they're like, I just don't have the time to deal with this. I'm too busy. Time is always a concern. Let's say an office of 5 operatories, which is pretty standard, and 5-6 operatories, which is pretty standard. What is the time and the cost to do something like that? Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, I always say, you're going to have costs whether you write a check for it or you make payments, right? I mean, so there's always cost. And what I've really tried to help every dental office understand is you always have a monthly cost of your computers. Even if you wrote a check and they're paid off, there's always a monthly cost. Part of that cost as they age and they start to break down is the inconveniences. Oh, I couldn't take x-rays today on this patient, so I lost the revenue of that full mouth series and we have to reappoint them, right? And, the front desk computer's not working, you can't check a patient out, then you have to walk them back to another computer. So you have costs associated with having technology that's not optimized in a dental practice. And so you recognize you will always have ongoing costs. Are you better off to know that cost is going to be at X amount per month? Yes, you are, because X amount per month every single month means that you can plan for no headaches. And that's why I always tell doctor, look, if you want to replace your stuff as it dies, think about that. It's all going to die. So you have it dying. You may have 2 die this month, and then you get 3, and you're always upset, and the staff's always upset. And who gets the new computer, right? Who gets the old one? And then now you have one hygienist that's upset, and she's like, well, you always complain at me, but my computer's breaking down. She's got the new one. So you can avoid all of that if you recognize, okay, first off, you have to get an IT person you trust. with the plan that you trust. Whenever IT people are telling me, oh, yeah, take your 5-year-old computer and put Windows 10 from Windows 7, I say, run, don't walk. Run, don't walk. Because ultimately, I know for a fact the amount of time that they're going to charge you is probably at least 2 hours to upgrade that. So you've probably got $250, $300. And that's almost half the cost of a brand new PC that'll last you 5 years. So that's not a good investment. And I can also promise you that you'll have problems, most likely if you have digital x-ray, when you do a 7 to 10 upgrade. You have all sorts of weird, flaky problems that are intermittent. Okay. So these things, I'm like, hey, if you take this path where you just accept a monthly payment, but you're not going to have problems, and then you plan ahead, we would plan. We'd say, look, in 5 years, 4 years, 11 months, this is being done. So, 2 months before, what's a good day for that? And staff isn't in, everything comes in and it goes out. And if it's done in that way, it's predictable. I know to do that is not going to take more than 2 hours per PC to put it in and load everything. And so a lot of this just is, and I know in dental you have to buy so many things, but you have to really look at what is it worth to you to keep up the most important thing in your office, which is your computer network. Because if you're relying on that, you can't operate if your server's down, you don't know who's coming in your office, right? You can't take x-rays, can't pull up treatment plan, you can't do anything. You're dead in the water. And you have to think about it. I've seen servers go down where offices were closed for 3-4 days because their IT person couldn't get there to do it. Hey, we've got other jobs, or they had to order a new computer, all the things that happen when you're in an emergency situation, especially in now post-COVID or COVID, right in the mix of it. I mean, everything is more difficult to get in short notice.
Well, I will tell you that we use this example all the time. And I talk about this also, is the concept of being proactive versus being reactive.
Yes.
And unfortunately, when it comes to computers and technology and connecting as one, we're very reactive. And when you're reactive, you're always in crisis mode, and that certainly is not healthy, and it doesn't benefit anybody in the practice. All it does is it really adds stress. So on that note, what are some things, I mean, like you said, if your IT guy comes and says, let's upgrade 7 to 10, run, what are some other pointers that you can recommend for doctors to pay attention to as deal breakers when it comes to choosing their IT guy?
Yeah, certainly. Well, the first thing, if I were choosing an IT person, I would ask them to inspect my environment and give me a full report on what is in my environment. That's the first thing I'd do. Because for me, you could ask me to do that, and I could do that in 15 minutes, depending upon how many computers you have. And if I knew you purchased them all at the same time, I'd look at one of them. I can find out. I can run what's called a BELARC, BELARC. I can see every software on your computer. Okay. So I can see, okay, you have EagleSoft and you have Dexis, right? And so once I had that, I would say, well, what do you know about this? If you have Dexis, what has been your experience with Dexis? Well, I've got 25 offices that use it, Doc. I'm very familiar with it. I know, Jim down at Dexis is the guy I call when I have problems. Okay, that person knows. If they're like, well, I don't know what Dexis is. I don't, I mean, that's the whole thing. If someone comes in, they don't know what a digital sensor is, they don't know what a panoramic system is, they know none of that. They don't know anything about the mouth. They know nothing. I would say it's not even worth your time to sit down with them. I mean, I say you only interview, if I were narrowing it down, I only interview IT companies that work in dental. And then I go online and I look, do they have a website? Do they have reviews, good or bad, right? Then I would go to Dental Town and I would check if anyone has had good or bad situations there. And then I would ask them, do you have experience with my environment? Do you have experience with my environment? And if you have a problem that you've been experiencing in your environment, hey, could you troubleshoot this? Maybe that as well. How would you troubleshoot this? Because those are things that really you you don't want there to be a finger pointing situation when you run into problems. When you have a good IT company, there's seldom a finger pointing situation because they will call DentalTI and they'll say, hey, Dave, we've got these sensors here. We need to know this, this, and this. And I'll say, make these settings, do these permission changes. And they'll say, gotcha. And they'll do it. A bad IT guy's never seen, not a bad, uh, IT person is not knowledgeable about dental IT. They call you, they have no idea, no clue what questions to ask. And I don't want to spend 2 hours educating them, right? And if I do have to spend 2 hours educating them, I've got to bill whoever has sent them, or I've got to bill them. So that's sort of why you don't want to have someone that's not knowledgeable about what you're doing operating your computer network. And then the other thing is, I would say, I want to see your complete strategy for updates, backups, and protection. So malware protection, antivirus. What are you guys going to do for me in those 3 areas? Because that's very critical. If you have software, you have to keep it up to date, right? And I also want to know, do you know how the software that I have integrates? Those would probably be the 4 things I would ask to give me enough comfort with that IT company to know that they're not learning on my dime. And I think that's what happens when you don't get experts. I don't have my personal, for me to come into an office as a consultant is at least $1,000 an hour, but I can solve a ton of problems in an hour because I know everything you have in the office. I know history. I just know so much about it that 1 hour of my time might be like 10 or 20 hours of someone else's time.
Sure.
That has to go out and learn about that. And I think it's the same with what you were talking about cosmetic dentistry. I mean, you probably know more about cosmetic dentistry than, you've probably forgotten more about it than some dentists know about it or are saying they're cosmetic dentists. So it's sort of the same type of thing. But when you don't know anything, it's very difficult to vet a service. And I think that some of the guidelines I gave, you sort of put it on their shoulders. It's up to them to show you that they know about your environment. It's not up to you to determine, do they know? That's sort of how I feel about it.
Yeah, some really great points, David. And to be honest, I think there should be a technology 101 course for dentists that are looking to invest in a dental practice and
like that.
How to start. I think one of the mistakes that we make is we're too trusting. And sometimes we do go outside of dental and we just figure IT is IT, right?
Yeah.
It's, a bunch of wires, you just plug it in and everything works.
Well, I'll give you an example, and you may be able to relate to this. You may be lucky enough to have one. I'm not rich enough either, but if I had a Ferrari, I wouldn't take it to a Chevy dealer, right? And expect them to be able to actually work on it. And I think that's the problem is we really look at, IT as IT when it's not, and you said it earlier, you don't know what you don't know. And, and you also, at the end of your practice day, at the end of every dentist practice day, the last thing they want to do is go and figure out what they need to do for IT. So
I'm sorry. It's just something that's for us as dentists, as far as our mindset is concerned, we're so clinically based that we don't want to deal with crisis. We don't want to deal with IT. And at 5 o'clock, we want to go see our kids, right? So it's the last thing that we want to deal with. There's so much to talk about, and I know we're kind of coming up short on time, but I wanted to talk about the new direct conversion FTG DC Air. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how somebody can invest or get involved and what training they need, and tell me a little bit more about that and how they can get a hold of you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the DC Air, one, in terms of, and the nice thing about it is it works in just about every software package that will allow for a Twain. And our Twain is very sophisticated. It's got functions specific to the sensor in there, like the battery level, has a button for endo mode so the sensor won't go to sleep. But it works in virtually every software, Dexis, Schick, Apteryx, all of the popular software packages. And the nice thing about the sensor is it's much easier to use because you don't have a cord, so it's much easier to position because you don't have the torque of a wire. And it also is very comfortable. It's got curved, we call that a comfort edge. That edge has less than 2 millimeters of dead space. So you can actually have that going towards the canine to premolar contact and see half the canine. And if they have thirds, you can flip it around and you can see the thirds. So this is the only sensor that can do that because wired sensors obviously can't. They just go in one direction. But the great thing about this in terms of ease of use is what I said earlier. We establish one energy level, and our sensor there's a log file. The sensor tells us whether or not it's getting the energy it needs, and they shoot it with one energy level, and they get great images. And that's the thing about direct conversion technology. And not to go deep into the technical aspect of it, I know you told me earlier that's give it to you in layperson's terms, so I'll do that. But all traditional sensors convert the X-ray photons to light, and they capture the light. And in that conversion process, you have movement of light, you have inherent blurriness. The DC air grabs X-ray photons directly, so there's no conversion. And you can imagine in imaging anything, if you're directly grabbing what's penetrating that object and not converting it, you're going to have sharper images. So the DC air's images are they're inherently sharp and detailed. So the difference is this, and what kind of sensor do you have, Dr. Safarian?
Schick.
Okay. You have a Schick 33?
I have a Schick.
Okay. Right, you got a Schick.
I don't know.
So
I don't know if it's a 33 or a 30.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I don't know.
I got you. Have you ever looked at those images without the sharpening filter on?
I have not.
Okay. If you ever turn off your sharpening filter, you'll see how really fuzzy images are. So all sensors really rely on sharpening to be applied to make it pleasing to the eye. And when you sharpen an image, it's modifying pixels and removing information. So you get artifact. That's why you probably don't do a lot of really heavy magnification on your images because you can see the artifact when you do that. The DC air, you can magnify at a high level, and you can see caries, incipient caries at the beginning stage, and the lines are very sharp and they're not enhanced. So the DC air actually has the highest resolution of any sensor out there, and it's not even close because it's different technology. And where that becomes important in the future is AI. In the future, and when I say the future, within 5 years, all of your radiographs will be read by AI before you walk in. And the last 2 weeks, I've talked to about every AI company in dental right now. We're looking for a partner if we don't create our own, which we may create our own. They've been amazed by our image quality, and they say, this gives you the best result with AI because it's not modified. And it's true pixel by pixel information. So that's really exciting, but the sensor will be easy to use. It'll be easy to integrate. It's easy to buy and own too. I'll tell you something about this sensor, no glass in it. It's all homogenized siliconized construction. There's only two pieces in this, and they're both silicon, meaning you can drop this. You can drop it and it doesn't delaminate or break. It doesn't compress. We actually were the only sensor that has an occlusal sleeve that this can go in, so you can take occlusal x-rays on children. But and the other thing we've done, we did a 2-year warranty with the deductible if you were to lose it or break it. Anything else is covered, but we've also, right now, we have a promotion where we're extending it, making it a 4-year warranty, where the last 2 years have just a deductible for anything that would happen.
Yeah.
So we're really trying to make it easy for, offices to get into it. The ones that get into it love it. Gordon Christensen, the CR, he's done 2 reviews. So it's the clearest, shows the most detail of any sensor. Go ahead.
Sorry. How can one get access, or what is if somebody's interested, where do they go?
Yeah, so they can certainly go to ftgimaging.com. They can go to DentalTI.com as well. So I'm part owner in FTG. I own DentalTI fully. We're distributors for the DCR. So, but right now, currently, we're sort of selling the DCR directly as well. But the reality is, where we've set our pricing on the direct sales model, you're probably better off to go through a dealer to get a little discount. And we'll probably eventually just be going through dealers. But initially, we wanted to make sure we had a handle on every sensor out there, the quality, and had a real close connection to our initial users.
Well, listen, we're at the top of the hour, and I want to
Okay.
respect everyone's time. If there was anything else that you wanted to add here in the last minute or two, is there anything else, David, that you want to include in this discussion?
What I would say is if anyone has questions for me related to something, not purchasing it even, you mentioned something, Dr. Safarian, a dental technology 101. I like that idea. I'm going to work on that for you.
Okay.
But any questions, please feel free to email me. I'd like to respond to that stuff. I'm passionate about this stuff, so I won't ignore you if you need help.
Well, I appreciate that, David. Look, there's a lot that that you covered here, and I can tell you that for the audience listening, at some level, it affects them in the details of what you explain, whether it's computer software, whether it's making sure that your team is not surfing the net and creating viruses within your network. I should say computer network. Sorry. I can tell you probably a lot of doctors right now are going on 8 to 12 plus years with their current computer network, and they're buying technology, and and that's where all the problems arise. So, David, thank you so much. I don't think this is the end of this discussion between us.
No,
and
I
appreciate you coming on today. So, thank you, David.
Thank you, Dr. Safarian. This was very nice to be with you today. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Look, I appreciate everybody listening in. Very valuable information by David. You can reach out to him on LinkedIn, and you saw a couple of the other links that you can reach him with. Certainly, technology is in the forefront of our practices every day, and I need to update and upgrade myself as well with some of this. So I'm part of that process of learning. But with that said, I want to thank all of you for joining us today at another episode of Shahin's Corner. And I'm Dr. Shahin Safarian. We'll see you soon. Have a great day.